Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. In a world where data was more powerful than weapons, elections were no longer a competition of ideas, but a battle fought with algorithm. Every decision a person made, from what they ate to how they voted, was meticulously predicted by a government that had mastered the art of manipulating information. No one questioned the results until now. Ethan Kane walked into the dimly lit command center of the Phantom Collective, the underground hacker group he'd led for nearly a decade. The walls hummed with the pulse of quantum processors, and screens displayed data feeds from every corner of the world. He rubbed his temples, staring at the election countdown. 5 days remained until the nation cast their votes, but Ethan already knew the result. The Communist Party would win again, just as they had for the past 50 years. He'd seen the same pattern play out over and over. Public opinion would waver, debates would be held, and polls would fluctuate. But it was all a charade. The government under Chairman Zhang S. Iron Grip controlled the data, and in the end, the numbers always fell in their favor. Ethan glanced at a holographic projection of the vote share. His face, once ruggedly handsome, was now worn from years of battle in the shadows, his brown hair flecked with silver. The results already in, he muttered to himself. Behind him, Scifiaudiobooks entered the room, her footsteps barely audible on the polished floor. She was a woman of contradictions. Her sharp intelligence was matched only by her quiet grace. Once she had been Ethan's partner both in work and in life, but their paths had diverged years ago when she chose to remain within the government. "Still think you can stop it?" Sophia asked, her voice laced with doubt. Ethan didn't turn to look at her. "We have to try. If we don't expose this now, it'll never stop. People deserve to know the truth." Sophia walked over to the data stream that filled the center of the room, a shimmering web of information flowing through the air. "This system," she began, trailing off as she watched the data cascade. "It's too perfect. The team has refined it to the point where even the slightest disruption gets flagged. The algorithms predict the electorate set behavior with 99% accuracy. You do need a miracle to break through." Ethan frowned, tapping a few commands into his personal terminal. He knew Sophia was right, but that didn't mean he would stop. There was always a crack in the system. No code was invincible, no data set flawless. "Sophia, do you ever regret it?" he asked, suddenly turning to face her. His green eyes bore into hers, searching for the woman he once knew. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked to a console and began pulling up files, accessing sensitive data streams only someone on the inside could read. Ethan watched her fingers move across the holographic keys with the ease of a master, her hesitation momentarily forgotten. "I used to think this was the only way to keep order," she said, finally, her tone flat. "But now I don't know. We've traded freedom for security, and I am not sure it was worth it." Ethan stood beside her, watching as she pulled up voter data from the past 5 elections. "So, you were helping me." Sophia hesitated again, then nodded. "I don't know how long I can, but yes, I've seen things I can to ignore anymore." Ethan smiled faintly. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The clock was ticking. Ethan and Sophia worked through the night, sifting through petabytes of data, searching for any evidence of tampering. They were looking for the smoking gun proof that the government had not only manipulated public opinion, but outright fabricated vote. "Look at this," Sophia said, pulling up a map of voter district. "See how the turnout percentages here spike? That's impossible. In a legitimate election, you'd expect some variation, but it's too clean." Ethan nodded, feeling a flicker of hope. "That's hard because those votes were never cast. The data was generated, inserted into the system to create the illusion of a landslide. They didn't just influence the voters, they outright created that." Sophia's face hardened. "This is the proof you need." "No," Ethan corrected her. "It's the proof we need. I can do this alone." Sophia gave him a tight smile. "Then let's make sure the world sees it." Days passed in a blur. Every moment brought them closer to Election Day, and with each hour, the weight of what they were about to do pressed heavier on Ethan's shoulder. The Phantom Collective, an invisible army of hackers scattered across the globe, had been working around the clock, but this operation was unlike anything they had ever attempted. Their plan was audacious. On Election Day, they would infiltrate the government central data hub, hijack the live vote count, and broadcast the fabricated numbers. to every screen, phone, and device in the country. It would be the ultimate act of rebellion, exposing the fraudulent system for all to see. But they knew the risks. If they failed, it wouldn't just mean the end of their movement. It would mean the end of them. Chairman Zorang had never been one to show mercy. "Are you sure about this?" asked one of the Phantom Collective senior members, a wiry man, known only by his handle, Ghost. "We pulled this off. There's no going back. We were burning every bridge." "I know," Ethan said, "but this is the only way." Ghost hesitated for a moment, then nodded.
"Weary with you, Kane."
"All the way." Sophia, who had been silent during the exchange, finally spoke up. "The real question is, how far will Sun go to stop us?" Ethan turned to her, his jaw set far enough that we need to be ready for anything. Election day arrived, and with it, the tension in the air became palpable. The streets were filled with people, their faces lit up by the holographic billboards displaying the candidate. Ethan's face flashed across the screens, but he knew better than to take comfort in the number. Every vote had already been decided, long before anyone stepped into the booth. Ethan sat in the Phantom Collective Sun Command Center, surrounded by monitors and data stream. His heart pounded in his chest as he watched the vote count start to come in. The numbers were exactly what he expected. Chairman Zorang, as candidate, was ahead by a wide margin, just as predicted. "Are you ready?" Sophia asked, standing by his side. Ethan took a deep breath. "Let's just do this." The team moved into action, their fingers flying across keyboards as they hacked into the government DAO server. It was a delicate operation, one that required precision and perfect timing. If they were discovered too early, the entire plan would collapse. Oiri and Ghost reported, his voice steady despite the tension, initiating the broadcast now. Ethan watched as the numbers on the screens began to shift, the fabricated data replaced by the real vote. It was a small change at first, barely noticeable to the untrained eye, but within moments, it became clear that something was wrong. "The votes, they were changing," Sophia whispered, her eyes wide with disbelief. Across the country, people stared at their screens, confused as the numbers fluctuated wildly. Ethan's heart raced. This was it. They were exposing the truth, showing the world that the government had been lying to them all along. But then the screens flickered. "What's happening?" Ethan demanded, his voice rising in panic. Ghost's hands flew across his keyboard. "We've been compromised. They're recountering the hack." Ethan's blood ran cold. Chairman Zorang had anticipated their move. Sophia stepped forward, her fingers dancing across the holographic interface. "I can override their countermeasures, but we don't have much time." Ethan nodded, adrenaline surging through him. "Do it." As Sophia worked to bypass the government defenses, Ethan felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This was their last chance. If they failed now, the truth would be buried forever. The screens flickered again, and for a brief moment, the real numbers appeared in full view. A government's reasserted control, and the fabricated data returned. Ethan slammed his fist against the console in frustration. We were losing control. Sophia didn't try to look up from her work. "Just give me a little more time." But time was the one thing they didn't have. Ethan's heart raced as he watched the numbers on the screens fight for dominance, real data flashing in and out as Sophia struggled to keep their hack alive. His team had prepared for every scenario, but he hadn't anticipated the sheer speed of Zorang's counterattack. Every second, the window of opportunity shrank, and the Phantom Collective's hard-fought access was slipping away. "Sophia," he shouted, gripping the edge of the console as though that alone could steady the chaos around him. "I know," she snapped back, her voice sharp with tension, hands moving in a blur across the interface. She barely blinked, immersed in the battle between the algorithms they had deployed and the relentless AI defending the government's data stream. They were flooding the system with false signals. It's like trying to pick a lock while the door is on fire. The holographic display flickered, and for a brief moment, the real vote count, Ethan's vote count, flashed across the main screen, a dead heat, nothing like the overwhelming landslide the government was trying to project. "We were so close," Ghost murmured from his station, sweat dripping down his temple. "If we can hold this open for just 5 more minutes, we can flood the airwaves with the truth." Sophia muttered something under her breath, too low for Ethan to hear, her brow furrowed in concentration. She was fighting against the very system she'd helped design. Ethan could feel the weight of what they were doing, pressing down on them. All the entire collective was pushing back against a government that had perfected the manipulation of reality. Suddenly, a series of warning lights flared red across the console. The room filled with an ominous hum as the servers began to overload, their processing power strained to the brink by the digital war waging within their code. "They were trying to shut us out," Ethan yelled. His heart pounded in his chest. "We need to reroute." "Already on it," Ghost replied, fingers flying over his keyboard. "But it's not gonna hold for long. These are some of the most aggressive countermeasures I've ever seen." Ethan cursed under his breath. They were running out of time. If they didn't break through, now all of their efforts would be for nothing, and the public would never see the truth. Chairman Sarin would win again, and the illusion of democracy would continue unchallenged. Sophia suddenly slammed her hand against the console, her face lit with a fierce determination. "I've got a back door," she said, her voice barely audible over the cacophony of alarms and alerts. "It's risky, but it'll get us deeper into the system." "What kind of risk?" Ethan asked, though he already knew the answer. Anything Sophia had to offer at this point would be dangerous, potentially lethal. "If I trigger it, we might lose the entire feed, but if we succeed, we'll break through their firewall for good." Her eyes locked onto Ethan, and he could see the resolve in her gaze. There was no going back. Ethan's throat tightened. The weight of the decision settled heavily on him, but there was no time to hesitate. "Do it?" Sophia's hands flew across the console, tapping in the sequence she knew from her time inside the government as inner working. She had designed the failsafe herself, never imagining she would one day use it against the very system she had built. The screens flickered again, and for a heartbeat, everything went dark. Ethan's breath caught in his chest. Had they just lost everything? Then the lights snapped back on and the vote count reappeared. But this time it wasn't terror. The government sent fabricated numbers that filled the screens. It was the truth. The votes were split, with Ethan's shares surging in real time as the legitimate data poured in. His victory, long suppressed, now blazed across the nation, Solus devices, exposing the depth of the government. "Sure, we did it," Ghost whispered in disbelief, his eyes wide as he stared at the screen. "We actually did it." Ethan's breath came in shallow bursts. He could hardly believe it. The truth was out there for everyone to see. The government has data. Manipulation was exposed. And for the first time in years, the people were seeing a real election unfold before their eye. But before he could even begin to celebrate, a sudden, sharp crackle filled the room. The main server sparked violently, smoke curling up from the console. Ethan stumbled backward, eyes wide. "They refrying the system," Sophia shouted, her hands moving frantically to contain the damage. "They were trying to erase everything." "No," Ethan lunged forward, grabbing for the emergency override, but it was too late. The screens began to glitch, the vote count flickering wildly once again. "They were erasing all the data," Ghost said, his voice hollow. "If they wipe the servers, we lose everything we just did." Ethan saw and raced, his pulse pounding in his ears. There had to be a way to save the information. He glanced at Sophia, who was furiously trying to stabilize the feed. "There's one more option," Sophia said, her voice strained, "but it's dangerous." "What is it?" Ethan asked. "I can force a total system shutdown, but if I do, the whole network will crash. We'd lose access permanently, and Soana's team would know exactly where we are." Ethan's breath hitched. A system shutdown would be catastrophic, not just for the Phantom Collective, but for the entire country. If they were discovered, they wouldn't just lose the election, they would lose their lives. But if they didn't act now, all the evidence they had fought so hard to reveal would disappear into the ether. "Do it," he said, his voice cold and decisive. There was no other option. Sophia nodded, her face pale but determined. She tapped in the final command, her fingers trembling ever so slightly. The room grew eerily silent as the command executed, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze. Then the lights blinked out. The command center was plunged into darkness. The only sound, the faint hum of residual power. Ethan held his breath, waiting for some sign that their plan had worked. And then, in the distance, the faintest sound of applause. It was faint at first, barely audible, but it grew louder, swelling like a tide. Ethan could hardly believe what he was hearing. "They saw it," Ghost said, his voice thick with emotion. "The people saw the truth." Ethan stood frozen in place, the realization dawning on him. They had done it. The broadcast had gone out before the system crashed and the people had seen the real vote count. But even as the applause echoed in the distance, Ethan knew the battle was far from over. The government wouldn't go down quietly. Chairman Zhao was still in power, and he would stop at nothing to silence those who had exposed him. "We need to move," Sophia said, her voice cutting through the moment of triumph. "They'll be coming for us." Ethan nodded, his mind already racing ahead. They had won a battle, but the war was far from over. Durang wouldn't he hesitate to retaliate? And their lives were now more in danger than ever. As they packed up their gear and prepared to flee, Ethan glanced at the screens one last time. The system was dead, the data erased, but the truth was out there now in the hands of the people. "We'll be ready for whatever comes next," Ethan said, his voice steady with conviction. Sophia shot him a grim smile. "We'll need to be..." Together they left the command center, stepping out into the night. The city stretched out before them, and somewhere in the distance, the sound of protest was rising. The people had seen the truth, and now there was no going back. But Ethan knew this was only the beginning. The battle for freedom had just begun.